Observations, pg 147, by Jonathan Swift. The paper called The Case of the Woolen Manufacturers, N 100, is very well drawn up. The reasonings of the authors are just, the facts true, and the consequences natural. But his censure of those 7 vile citizens who import such a quantity of silk stuffs and woolen cloth from England is 100 times gentler than enemies to their country deserve, because I think no punishment in this world can be great enough for them, without immediate repentance and amendment. But after all, the writer of that paper hath very lightly touched one point of the greatest importance, and very poorly answered the main objection, that the clothiers are defective both in the quality and quantity of their goods. For my own part, when I consider the several societies of handicraftsmen in all kinds, as well as shopkeepers, in this city, after 18 years' experience of their dealings, I am at a loss to know in which of these societies the most or least honesty is to be found. For instance, when any trade comes first into my head, upon examination I determine it exceeds all others in fraud. But after I have considered them all round, as far as my knowledge or experience reacheth, I am at a loss to determine, and to save trouble I put them all upon a par. This I chiefly apply to those societies of men who get their livelihood by the labor of pg 148 their hands. For as to shopkeepers, I cannot deny that I have found some few honest men among them, taking the word honest in the largest and most charitable sense. But as to handicraftsmen, although I shall endeavor to believe it possible to find a fair dealer among their clans, yet I confess it hath never been once my good fortune to employ one single workman, who did not cheat me at all times to the utmost of his power in the materials, the work and the price. One universal maxim I have constantly observed among them, that they would rather gain a shilling by cheating you than 20 in the honest way of dealing, although they were sure to lose your custom, as well as that of others, whom you might probably recommend to them. This, I must own, is the natural consequence of poverty and oppression. These wretched people catch at anything to save them a minute longer from drowning. Thus Ireland is the poorest of all civilized countries in Europe, with every natural advantage to make it one of the richest. As to the grand objection, which this writer slubbers over in so careless a manner, because indeed it was impossible to find a satisfactory answer, I mean the knavery of our woolen manufacturers in general, I shall relate some facts, which I had more opportunities to observe than usually fall in the way of men who are not of the trade. For some years, the masters and wardens, with many of their principal workmen and shopkeepers, came often to the deanery to relate their grievances, and to desire my advice as well as my assistance. What reasons might move them to this proceeding, I leave to public conjecture. The truth is, that the woolen manufacture of this kingdom sate always nearest my heart. But the greatest difficulty lay in these perpetual differences between the shopkeepers and workmen they employed. 10 or a dozen of these latter often came to the deanery with their complaints, which I often repeated to the shopkeepers, as that they brought their prices too low for a poor weaver to get his bread by, and instead of ready money for their labor on Saturdays, they gave them only such a quantity of cloth or stuff, at the highest rate, which the poor men were often forced to sell 1/3 below the rate, to supply their urgent necessities. On the other side, the shopkeepers complained of idleness and want of skill, pg 149, or care or honesty in their workmen, and probably their accusations on both sides were just. Whenever the weavers, in a body, came to me for advice, I gave it freely, that they should contrive some way to bring their goods into reputation, and give up that abominable principle of endeavoring to thrive by imposing bad ware at high prices to their customers, whereby no shopkeeper can reasonably expect to thrive. For besides the dread of God's anger, which is a motive of small force among them, they may be sure that no buyer of common sense will return to the same shop where he was once or twice defrauded. That gentlemen and ladies, when they found nothing but deceit in the sale of Irish cloths and stuffs, would act as they ought to do, both in prudence and resentment, in going to those very bad citizens the writer mentions, and purchase English goods. I went farther, and proposed that 10 or a dozen of the most substantial woolen drapers should join in publishing an advertisement, signed with their names to the following purpose, that for the better encouragement of all gentlemen and 100. The persons undernamed did bind themselves mutually to sell their several cloths and stuffs, naming each kind, at the lowest rate, right merchantable goods, of such a breadth, which they would warrant to be good according to the several prices, and that if a child of 10 years old was sent with money and directions what cloth or stuff to buy, he should not be wronged in any one article, and that whoever should think himself ill-used in any of the said shops, he should have his money again from the seller, or upon his refusal, from the rest of the said subscribers, who, if they found the buyer discontented with the cloth or stuff, should be obliged to refund the money, and if the seller refused to repay them and take his goods again, should publicly advertise that they would answer for none of his goods any more. This would be to establish credit, upon which all trade dependeth. I proposed this scheme several times to the Corporation of Weavers, as well as to the manufacturers, when they came to apply for my advice at the Deanery House. I likewise went to the shops of several woolen drapers upon the same errand, but always in vain, for they perpetually gave me the PG 150 deaf ear, and avoided entering into discourse upon that proposal, I suppose, because they thought it was in vain, and that the spirit of fraud had gotten too deep and universal a possession to be driven out by any arguments from interest, reason, or conscience. PG 151.